I want to now review briefly the sutras, the Yoga Sutras 17-37 of chapter 3. And these are experiences, I call this section experiences from Samyama. And Samyama was described in the previous sets of sutras. This is the combination of rungs 6, 7, and 8 of the 8 rungs of yoga, which are dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So concentration is dharana, dhyana is meditation, and samadhi is the deep absorption. So for convenience sake, Patanjali collectively calls them Samyama. Now in these sutras, what he's talking about is the fact that we then take this Samyama and we use it to explore the otherwise unconscious mind, the subtle realms of the mind. There are numerous subtle realm experiences that come, and each of them in their own way, when we set them aside, allows us to uncover the truth, which goes back to Sutra 3 of chapter 1. Tata drastus vasanam, yogas chitta vritti nirodha. We do the nirodha, we do the setting aside of all the vrittis of the chitta, and then Tata, then the drastu, the seer, the true self, rests in its own true nature, which is Purusha or Atman or pure consciousness. The suggestion is to set aside as not self all the levels of our being and see through the avidya, the ignorance, which we talked about in earlier sections, through discrimination or viveka, which is the purpose of the 8 rungs, and non-attachment. Now, in this section here, we're not going to go through every one of these, I think it's 21 sutras here. There's a principle being outlined here. This is not by Patanjali a checklist of meditations. We need to do a meditation on each one of these things. It's sort of a summary of the kinds of experiences that we have of the subtle coming forward to us in our meditation practices. And then we go into the deep absorption on them, and then we let them go and do self-realization. This one here is pointing out that there is a combination, an object, the object applied by that name, and the conceptual existence, and these interplay. There is like saying there's syllables of a word, there's a table, there's a specific table over there, and there's tableness. So if we talk about 3 different tables, they are different from one another, but yet they are all essentially tableness. So this sutra is pointing out that those 3 are together. And by Samyama on the distinction between these 3, the name and the tableness and the specific table, we gain some information about the nature of all sounds. And this is just an example. As you play with those things, you'll gain some insights. And then what do we do with those? We pass on them. We let them go by. Through the direct perception of latent samskaras comes knowledge of previous incarnations. The principle is essentially, if we are able to see clearly where our samskaras that define me are today, then the past that led up to that gets revealed. People in the field of medicine and psychology are well aware of this concept on a more surface level. If we take a thorough review of what the situation is now, it tells us something about what led up to it, up to the current situation, and it tells us something about what needs to be done to correct the problem. Now, this is talking about, this refers forward to Sutra 38, which is the next section. And the next section we're going to go through is only one sutra in there because Patanjali put this one, it's a beautiful principle here. It says, what do we do with our subtle experiences? Well, subtle experiences are both. They are both evidence of advancement, and they are obstacles to the higher samadhi. This is what Patanjali points out here. And so we repeat this a lot in this section with these here as we go through these 21 sutras. By Samyama on presented ideas comes the knowledge of another person's mind. While we're not doing this, we may observe this because we start to see that there's an intuition between me and other people. I may have some ideas about what's going on with the other person. Do we make a big deal out of that, try to cultivate that, to read the minds of other people? No. What do we do with that? We see that, okay, it's evidence of some degree of attainment. I'm moving forward. I'm gaining awareness of this subtle realm. But if I get trapped into it, it's an obstacle to where I'm going. And so let me set it aside, the viveka business, the non-attachment. The underlying support of that knowledge remains unperceived. So that means I cannot yet perceive the exact nature of the other person's precise bhutas and samskaras and all that. We don't need to know that. When samya on the form of one's body is done, one becomes invisible. We're not trying to become invisible, but if we do samyama, if we do deep meditation, samadhi, samyama, on our own physical body, we will gain some insights. We will gain some experiences. That's all this is saying. And once again, I'm not going to try to go through every one of these. It's not a checklist of meditations that we all need to kind of practice. The bottom line here is, once again, if we have a glimpse of this, it's a sign of an attainment, but it's also an obstacle to the highest realization. In the same way as in the last one, one's able to suspend the ability of the body to be heard or touched or tasted or smelled. So the body has a characteristic of being able to be heard, being able to be touched, being able to be tasted or to be smelled. And through samyama on these various inner processes, those abilities are suspended. And once again, these are attainments and obstacles. And again, I'm saying here, I'm not going to try to go into details of these things. If you're really strongly curious about these, you can come back and look at this on the website a little bit more. You can find Yoga Sutras commentaries that describe more about this in detail. I'm going through them with you just to emphasize that the key for every one of these things is see the way in which it's an attainment, but don't get lost in it. See it as ultimately as an obstacle and set it aside. Talks about karma, and samyama on karma tells us something about the time of coming death of the body. Kind of makes sense, you know, if you know the current situation, you know what the future is going to hold. And what do we do here? It's an attainment and it's an obstacle. By samyama on friendliness and other attitudes, there comes the strength of that attitude. That may be pretty helpful and positive. When those are introduced in Sutra 33 of Chapter 1, they were means of living in the world and attaining stability. Now here, in this block of sutras, when we look at this, it's now being used to do samyama on that friendliness or the other attitudes so that we can move beyond it. It gets richer and richer and better, but still, once again, we see it as a sign of an attainment, and yet don't get too impressed with it and let it go. Samyama on the strength of elephants brings us similar strength. Doesn't mean we're going to become an elephant. And once again, while there's benefits that comes from that, once again, we see it's both an attainment and it's potentially an obstacle, so don't get too lost in it. When we have a flash of inner light, knowledge of subtle objects comes. We can view at a distance. Let's not get too impressed with our psychic abilities and start selling our psychic skills to others. Once again, magic happens by following the inner light, magic said playfully, and yet with all the experiences, see it as both an attainment and an obstacle. There is an inner source of light. By samyama on the inner sun, knowledge of many subtle realms can be known. but let's not get lost by pursuing subtle realms. It's a distraction. And so here we are again. It's both an attainment and it's an obstacle. Inside, we find a reflection that is an inner moon. Remember, a moon is a reflection of the sun. And we learn something about the arrangement of inner stars. When we do 61 points exercise, which is part of the Yoga Nidra series that you're probably familiar with, that we do often, those are the inner stars. And if we find the moon, which is the reflection of the inner light, we can gain knowledge about those stars. And you allow your direct experience to tell you what that is. And once again, see it as attainment and obstacle. And remember, I said this before, this is not a checklist that you and I are trying to go through and do a meditation with every one of these, but these are samples of the kind of stuff that comes naturally from our inner journey. We need not push them away. We experience them, we gain some insights from them, and then we recognize that we don't need them and that they ultimately would be obstacles if I get lost in them. So what do? I let them go. By Samyama on the pole star, which remember the pole star is the North Star above the earth, and internally we find a star in there. We find something about the movement of all the inner points of light. If you find that, what do? You see it as, okay, this is neat, this is an attainment, but it's potentially an obstacle, so let me not get lost in it. Samyama on the navel center, the third chakra, knowledge of the arrangement of the systems of the body can be known. Very, very good and useful practice to do, particularly for psychologists and doctors, people who are service of other people. By doing this on yourself, it can help you do a better job of intuitive diagnosis of other people and use it in the spirit of service, but don't get too impressed over it. Navel center meditation brings some attainments, and yet we don't get lost into it, because otherwise it will be an obstacle to the highest realization that we're trying to do. In the throat area, there's a pit. Samyama on the pit of the throat has an effect on hunger and thirst. And so once again, if it happens to you, see it as an attainment and an obstacle. Don't get lost in it. Samyama on the tortoise channel, which is near or below the throat, steadiness. Steadiness of the tortoise comes. And once again, if that happens to you, see it as both an attainment and an obstacle. There is a coronal light on the top of the head. There's visions of siddhas, of great masters, and like this. And so that's a nice thing. Sounds fun, doesn't it? And once again, if it happens, see it as an attainment, but don't get lost in it. Don't pursue it too much. Remember the higher obstacle. If you find the intuitive light of higher knowledge, the jhana light, anything may be known. Many, 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 many insights come on the inner journey. And it's very common. We've all heard this. We've maybe had some glimpses of this, of inner light being our guide. And so there is that pradibha, there's that intuitive light or flash of knowledge. And once again, see it as both an attainment and an obstacle. Don't get lost in it. Don't avoid it, don't push it away, but don't get lost in it. Samyama on the heart brings knowledge of the mind. A beautiful, wonderful exploration to do, but once again, see it as an attainment and an obstacle and set it aside. By having experiences of presented ideas, there's a commingling of the subtlest aspect of mind and pure consciousness, Purusha. Purusha and Sattva are not the same thing. Samyama on pure consciousness reveals knowledge of that pure consciousness. Pretty neat. And so it's still dualistic. There's still a me that's doing Samyama on the consciousness. But play with it and don't get trapped too much into seeking it that kind of way. Allow it to lead you where you're going. From that light of higher knowledge, consciousness or Purusha arises higher, transcendental or divine hearing. We can gain the ability to have sensory experience of the subtle realm of hearing, touching, vision, taste, and smell. If you run into them, enjoy them, see them as both attainments and obstacles. Anyway, I just wanted to briefly go through this, not in great detail. Again, if you want to look at the detail, you can grab your favorite Yoga Sutras manual or look at this again on the website. But again, please don't think of it as a checklist. I need to do this meditation and this meditation and this. It's a sampling of the kinds of things we experience when we are willing to explore the subtle realm. If we look, for example, as a reminder at our friendly circle chart, when we move inward past the conscious mind, we run into the swirling dream level of mind and images and people and stuff and things. And all of this, we run into it. Let's not be afraid of it. Don't put a wall up here to prevent ourselves from going there, but don't get lost in this either. See that this is where I'm trying to go. I'm trying to experience the true self, the Purusha, the Atman, the Turiya, the Tripura. And so this is naturally encountered along the way. And as we run into it, we see that there's certain levels of insight and attainment that come. But also, it still is between where we are out here and where we're trying to go. So in some sense, it can be an obstacle. Let's not get lost in these obstacles that come here. That's the principle that I'm wanting you to see as we briefly went through this block of sutras here. Okay, to be continued. Thanks for visiting. Bye-bye.